Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Dune Prophecy. Patrick Klepek and I have watched the first episode of this show, which is streaming right now on Max, the one to watch for HBO. Dune Prophecy Episode 1, The Hidden Hand. Dune Prophecy takes place roughly 10,000 years before the events of the Dune movies. Patrick Klepek, what did you think of the show so far?
Boy, this show is not written to be penetrable by anyone who's already not deeply familiar with the Dune films. And at least based on the first episode, I'm not sure it's penetrable by people who have watched the Dune films. I found this to be slow in a painful way, boring.
Oof.
I didn't watch the Dune films wondering, I wonder what else is happening in the world of Dune. That's just not something that occurred to me while watching those. And at least how this show is written, I find myself compelled back to that opinion of, I would just like to go back to Arrakis. Like, thank you. Like, where is Arrakis Airlines? Like, take me there. I'm not particularly taken by the setup here. I'll be watching it. My wife is Dune obsessed, and she remains hopeful about the rest of the show, if not necessarily blown away by the premiere. But if not for that, I think I would be hard pressed to be continuing the journey of Dune Prophecy.
Yeah, didn't love it. The reviews have been quite mixed. You know, a lot of reviewers have seen 4 or 5 episodes already. There's going to be 8 episodes total. Many reviews were, I think, said the first half of the show, and it's not been overwhelmingly positive, and they've had many of the same issues that you've had. There's a lot going on in the show, is what I would say. And this is a show where, like, I was like kind of locked in watching it, and I still had to like rewind a bunch of times to like be like, wait, did I understand correctly? Like, what that, what? It's very, very dense, and so far I don't think the characters are particularly that interesting. It's clear that the show kind of wants to be Game of Thrones set in the Dune universe, but I don't know that it quite, because the thing that Game of Thrones has is all these characters are amazing. Like, the casting is amazing. And I think the casting is completely fine in Dune Prophecy. I don't think it's bad. Like, all the actors are great in the show. But it's just, I don't know, man. Like, there's just so much going on. Like, just as an example, the opening starts with a flashback. Like, the whole show is a flashback. But the opening starts with a flashback that then itself has a flashback. You know what I mean? Like, within the flashback, there is a flashback within it.
I mean, well, so much of this show is part of what I find very appealing about, I haven't read the book, so I'm not going to pretend to be deeply familiar with Frank Herbert's, universe and what is present in the books is not present in the movies. But one of the things I really like about the films is that a lot goes unexplained. You're just sort of asked to take for granted.
Right.
Like, these are the rules of this universe.
Oh, there's like a glowing ball following everyone around. Like, you gotta,
hey, they have space travel, but like no robots. Like, and I know there are like, they don't acknowledge that in the films. You just sort of take for granted, wow, this is a futuristic society that for whatever reason has either chosen or did not follow a technological path that included artificial intelligence. Like, it's a glaring omission in its presentation of science fiction that is so different than every other version. It's part of what makes it stand out. Is like, it's futuristic, but like lacking so many of the trappings that we associate with like far off versions of technology. And then for the first thing in Dune Prophecy to be like, well, you want us to explain what's going on there? Have you seen Terminator? Like, it was that. Like, it was that. And that is just the most boring answer to that question. And
I mean, it is accurate. It is accurate to like the books, right? That there was a machine. Like,
but it is left. There is, my understanding is that. So this is based on a series of books by Frank Herbert's son.
Yes.
And in the Dune series, yes, there is allusions to like leaving behind like thinking
Correct.
machines.
Correct.
It is left pretty opaque what exactly that means. And then what his son does is goes,
what if
it was a cool robot war?
What if all this stuff what if we went in and filled in all those blanks? People would love that, right?
No, the blanks are the blanks. I think it's look, this is what happens in all prequels, right? Like, you are going to start filling in gaps because those are going to be your hooks to like an audience that's invested in the universe. And it ends up being, I think, a fundamental either in some ways it's kind of twofold. Like, maybe the answers are just bad, right? Like maybe if there was a better, more interesting answer, I'd be like, oh, okay, I didn't think I needed to know that, but that does enrich the world.
Uh-huh.
But I'm actually, I think, a little stricter on it, which is the ambiguity of the Dune universe is a feature, not a bug. And part of this whole prequel series and the approach to it is seeing that as a bug, not a feature. And I think once you work backwards from that initial
A robot
thought,
bug. One
a
might say.
robot bug, it starts to make the whole thing like pretty rickety going forward.
Yeah, well, we've seen successful prequels shows as well, like Better Call Saul is the canonical example, and one of the great things that show did is created new characters that you care about, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's so important to care about the characters. You had the characters like Chuck and Kim in that show. We never saw those characters in Breaking Bad. And it's like you as a viewer, you're really invested in what happens to those characters. And I don't know that, again, we've only seen one episode. I don't know that we have seen enough to really get us to invest in any of these characters. One of the big problems I think with this show is it makes Valia kind of the protagonist in some ways, or like the POV character. And that's just not a great it's weird that like Inez is not the main character. Do you know what I'm saying? Like because Inez is like she's the one that's going to be entering this world. So making Valia like the POV audience surrogate is just an odd decision. I understand why they did
is
it.
she a hero? Like it's
Right.
like it's a we like it puts the audience so far ahead of what appears to be the, like you said, kind of the main the current character is going to go on a journey
Yeah,
through
yeah.
this, and it's like we're far
I think
ahead in
it's
the
just because the show has so much plot. Like you can't just start with Inez because like you have to explain all this other shit about the genetics and the eugenics and all the other stuff. You know, so it's like you can't just
Right.
start with Inez or else you don't get any of that. I mean, I guess you could have like Inez could have been there for orientation on day one and then they explain it all. I don't know why they didn't do it that way, but whatever. We're not the ones making Dune Prophecy.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what actually happens in these episodes, or in this episode, I should say. In a flashback, we learn about the war against thinking machine technology.
We sure do.
Do you know what I thought of when because they keep using the word thinking machines?
Yeah.
In the
Which I love.
show.
It's a very evocative term.
Yeah, I think I remember the. I feel like in the Jurassic Park, the original Steven Spielberg movie, there was like a tutorial that you see with Mr. DNA of how they put it together, and then I think the DNA strand is like thinking machines and supercomputers.
Now that's where our geneticists take over. Thinking machines, supercomputers.
I kept thinking about that when I heard the term thinking machines because it's like a very it was at one point a very common term, I think, but I think it's not anymore. Very much like the technology itself in this universe. Anyway, the war against thinking machine technology resulted in Valia Harkonnen and her family being banished. Valia is going to be one of our main characters, and she's played by Emily Watson. Just want to say, Emily Watson, one of our greatest living actresses or actors in general. One of the first things I saw her was in Breaking the Waves. That was incredible. Anyway, huge fan of Emily Watson. Always going to root for her in whatever she's doing. Valia joins a woman named Raquella, who forms an organization of truthsayers called the Sisterhood, which is a precursor to the Bene Gesserit that we see in the Dune movies. Raquella eventually becomes obsessed with creating a leader that their organization can control, so they essentially decide to try to breed them using genetics, genetic control and manipulation. When Raquella dies, Valia uses the voice, a telekinetic power that the Bene Gesserit will eventually master, to kill Raquella's daughter and assume charge of the Sisterhood. Valia feels as though a reckoning is coming, the Tyrann Arafel, a holy judgment brought on by a tyrant. In order to stop it, she believes she needs to install a leader of the Imperium that they control. All right, let's just talk about, that's kind of like the first 20, 30 minutes of the show. I will say, it turns out Valia came up with the voice, Patrick. So that's nice.
Dude, like the way that
she's the one she thought that up by herself.
The voice is already one of the it stands out even in the Dune films, which are as grounded as a take as you can do with like really extraordinary material. I think it like tries really hard to make it all make sense and is largely successful. But the voice is like this goofy little thing just kind of sitting out here, and it does its best with it, and I think it mostly works. But here is deployed as a force power. Like
Uh-huh.
all the only thing that's missing is her like the Emperor in Star Wars, like sticking out her hand and like blue lightning like coming out of it. It's the moment that happened that my eyes are rolling into the back of my skull,
I
and
think
it
it's
gave me.
it's more that like she's the one that thought like 10,000 years ago this person thought it up. This is like I take the complaint you made about the thinking machines and I apply it to this because it's like it's like it's such a mystical, mysterious thing. Like, oh, like who thought? It's kind of like, hey, when did we start drinking cow's milk? Like, who sat underneath a cow and was like, I'm gonna drink whatever comes out of these things. Like, it doesn't. It's just a weird thing to think of there being an origin to it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that there being
Well,
like,
I think what you're getting at is what it's, and again, is my problem with. It's a weird example, like
yeah, that
but
is weird. I don't know why. I don't know why my mind went there.
I think what you're revealing is you're actually thinking about this all the time, and then stopping yourself from looking up the Wikipedia entry.
I'm just saying, there's like everyday things that it's like, uh, it's weird to consider how they came into being, and then like,
I think a version of this is like we don't need an answer. Like
yeah.
again, this is my point. The ambiguity is the fun. Is like where would a thing like that come from? Like that's an odd characteristic of this religious sect or like
Yes.
whatever. Like, and that's the fun part is that like thousands of like hundreds of thousands of years have happened, and you're not privy to it. These are the facts on the ground. Like you're just thrust into a world that feels rich and long and big, and there's not going to be like a crawl that comes across the screen explaining, and the voice came from one woman. You know what I mean? It feels like that's what this is. I feel like
coincidentally one of the protagonists of this show. It's
wow, just wow.
Who we lucked out. We lucked out as viewers.
Yeah.
Like we got to see the origin of the voice. So that's great. I'm so happy for us. I like that there's this kind of emphasis on the truth saying in the show, and like seeing how that's like operationalized. That's kind of cool. That's kind of like exploring that in a different way. Like that was in the movies as well, of course, but like
the notion of like the burden of like telling a lie. Like there's some interesting sort of rhetorical ideas that they're playing with here.
Yeah.
And learning the structure of the Sisterhood like is not a terrible place. Like it's an interesting idea. I think again, like many things in the show, my problems are not with the broad outline. It's the specifics that get filled in that I end up taking issue with.
You know what is a little weird though, Patrick Klepek, is this show, Dune Prophecy, takes place 10,000 years before the events of the Dune movies, and yet a lot of the technology seems to be the same. The outfits seem to be the same, like the Bene Gesserit wear like
Star
the
Wars
same
problem.
the veil. Yeah, but even in Star Wars, that's like decades. You know what I'm saying? Like the entire Skywalker saga takes place over like 2 lifetimes, right? Like from Anakin being a kid to Rey in Rise of Skywalker. I get, yeah. It's like a couple lifetimes basically, right? So like a couple hundred years tops, and this is 10,000 years. It's like, wow, they're still using the same exact spaceships. The Bene Gesserit are dressing in the exact same way, like the same veil that they use in the movie.
It's almost like they're taking a lot of the iconography and imagery from the films, but also like not angering the filmmaker about to make a third one of those because it's gonna like create any sort of issues with whatever he wants to do, and that like it's riffing on the existing stuff without doing anything interesting on its own, which like no disrespect meant to like Herbert's son, but like feels like a broader indictment of the project of even trying to tell stories within your father's own influential work.
My sense is probably just, hey, we want people to have the feeling of, oh, it's the thing we recognize from the movies.
Yeah.
And you don't trust them to be like, oh, it's 10,000 years before. Of course, everything would be different. Of course, the technology would be different. It's 10,000 years before then. I mean, to be fair, we do see like additional locations here that we didn't see in the Dune movies. Like they go into this bar. Like, yeah, they go into this club. Yeah, they go into this club. There's still EDM music in the future, whenever this takes place. Because theoretically, this show takes place thousands of years into humanity's future. But I think it's going to be a real it's a real problem, I think, narratively, because it's like, oh, the same problems they're dealing with in Dune, they were dealing with those same issues 10,000 years ago, and it kind of saps like you could have they could have dealt with a whole different set of things, right? But like, I don't know, it kind of saps a little bit of the tension from it. So
Yeah, it has strong. What was the John Wick show, the Peacock one?
the Continental, yeah,
This show has strong Continental vibes, which is
yes, that's a great comparison.
wow,
A show that literally no one I know has seen other than you. Yeah.
Yes. This will probably be seen by more because this is like like a HBO Max show that is now on HBO proper and gets a bit of that prestige because of how they've shook things up. This is the kind of show that I don't mean to like hammer the distinction between an HBO Max show and an HBO show. I think there's no chance that if Max didn't exist, this show is on HBO. Like it's just not. I don't think it hits the quality bar that HBO would normally associate with stuff that would put on a Sunday slot. But I think the point I was making about the Continental was none of the creatives involved talking about this show, promoting this show, endorsing this show. Like that was true of the Continental. The Continental eventually got outright buried by the filmmakers. Like, yeah, they didn't come to us. They didn't talk to us. They just went and made a show. And this feels like similar, where it's like they're trying not to make the filmmakers and the creatives angry, but they do want to coast off of, you know, what they made. And by not being able to, you know, this was Villeneuve like doing a Dune series. Like I'd be much more interested in like what does he find interesting about this world that has to be episodic? Anyway, it's just a long way of saying.
Alison Schapker is the showrunner for Dune Prophecy. Very talented, creative person. Has worked on Alias, Fringe, and Altered Carbon in the past. So, but I don't know if Denny has said anything about the show. But I think you're right. He's definitely not doing a full court press,
No.
you know, promoting it for sure. What else happens in this show? Decades pass. So there basically the whole show is a flashback. It starts with a flashback. There's a flashback within the flashback where we see Raquela's opening. Now we're in the quote unquote present day of the show. We see Salusa Secundus, the homeworld of the Imperial House, which is occupied by House Carino. The head of House Carino is played by Mark Strong. He's due to wed his daughter Inez to the 9-year-old son of the House Lucchese, Pruitt. The plan is for Inez to wed Pruitt, go off and do her own thing in the Sisterhood while Pruitt comes of age. Meanwhile, a Carino soldier named Desmond Hart shows up after surviving an attack on Arrakis and tries to win the Emperor's trust. If you recognize Desmond Hart in a futuristic sci-fi TV show where you don't know what his loyalties are, it's because he appeared in Raised by Wolves playing almost an identical character.
It feels like he walked off the set.
Yeah.
When that show ended,
Like
I only watched the first season.
Yeah.
Anyway. I will say that show. Did you watch any of it?
Yeah, I watched the first season. That was great.
Yeah, I watched the first season. Don't watch the whole first season. Don't recommend it. I mean, it's got some good stuff.
It really goes off the rails. It really goes off the rails.
But the pilot is
excellent.
Probably some of the best sci-fi that Scott has done in the last 20 years. It is visually incredible. And then just stop watching after that.
All right. Anyway, Inez's Trusair, Kasha, from the Sisterhood begins to lose her mind. Pruitt accidentally lets loose a robot lizard of some kind at their engagement party, and Desmond seemingly murders Pruitt with unknown powers, and then Kasha. Inez's Trusair also dies by a similar fashion, so maybe he also killed Kasha as well. It's not explained yet. That's how the episode ends. So that's what's going on in the present day. There's this whole subplot. It's basically like The Crown, where, you know, Inez is she just is a girl who wants to have fun, you know. She's a girl.
Let the girl have fun. Come on.
She wants to have sex with her instructor in the club. You know,
cute.
Yeah. I do like that you kind of feel bad for the 9-year-old kid who needs to like be put in the situation, and then he instantly reveals that he's a complete shit. You know,
that's good. That turn is for what was probably a very expensive pilot, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff going on here. That might have been like my favorite little detail.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, great, here's a little shit. Well, then the show kills him immediately,
and he kills him. It kills him immediately.
It's like, we're onto something here. Time to die.
There's all this stuff with Desmond Hart. You see, like, there's this cool like video that they play. By the way, it's kind of like the Phantom Menace issue, where the technology that was 10,000 years ago seems to be more advanced than the technology they have in Dune, right? Uh, that was the sense I got. Like the little Sisterhood, they have the little like iPhone things with the profiles on them,
Mhm.
right? Like that we didn't see that really in the Dune movies. And
Yeah, and you know, and
there's this
there's
like holographic player. I know there was like a kind of holographic player, but it looked shittier in the Dune movies. You know, and like it's like
yeah, there's a world where if and I can see the appeal. Like if where you want to set this show is, if this show was at, I feel unfortunately this show is going to be like desperately tied to Arrakis and like trying to draw you into like what was happening here that like helps explain a little bit what's happening, is going to happen. I would have been far more interested in a show that was like deeply interested in the philosophy over the thinking machines, right? Like if this was about like, there's lines like, actually, I think we were too quick to dismiss the usefulness of like this technology. Like, okay, a world that like went to war against, it looked, its depiction of the robot war very boring and trite. It's stuff I've seen a million times before in a million boring Terminator sequels. But as a premise of like, hey, in this universe, what you've seen, that's all settled. Like this is the way this world works. Like you don't see this shit anywhere. It's not talked about. It is settled dogma, doctrine that like we do not engage with that technology. It doesn't come up as a matter of philosophical debate. It's not a plot point in any of those films. It's not even addressed. It's just taken as fact. You want to set something that like unpacks that, and maybe that if the show goes in that direction, I think that it's one of the more interesting threads I find is, and because I find it one of these interesting threads of Dune is just how its technology arrived at where it did. So they could do something with that, and I would find it to be a much more interesting show than a lot of conversations about genetics that like lead up to Paul Atreides, like, which I'm afraid is actually like where we're going with the show.
I'm not sure that the show does a particularly good job setting up mysteries that I think we will care about. The one thing I do think is interesting that was brought up is this idea that by trying to prevent something horrible from happening, that you end up causing that thing to happen.
Yeah.
You know, like that's kind of cool. I like that, and we'll see how far that takes us. But yeah, any other thoughts on the first episode of Dune Prophecy? Bit of a mixed bag, I think. I don't think either of us loved it. And
I have to watch it because of my long-term relationship, and I'm hoping it gets better. That's that's kind of, do you think you'll continue?
I think we should. Yeah, I think I'll probably continue watching it, and so therefore that means probably you should expect some more coverage here.
Yeah, again, like I like my wife is going to be Sunday night. We're watching the new Dune, so I'm going to be watching it too. So I'll be seeing this through as we like regardless of whether I'd like to or not. The things we do for our partners, and so I'm rooting for it to get better. Like pilots can be awkward and messy. I'm not encouraged by the reviews that have seen more that don't necessarily point to a show that finds its footing as it goes along, but if only for the sake of both of us, David, I'm hoping the show finds a more interesting identity as we go along.
Absolutely. I'm struggling to figure out who we should root for in the show. That's one of the things, right? Like,
yeah, because the quote main character seems. Are we the bad guys?
Yeah. So is the main character like Inez, I guess, but like the show doesn't even introduce her until halfway through the show and until the episode, and so it's like I'm not sure if we're supposed to care about her journey and her being more like going deeper into the world of the Sisterhood, which like
everyone
we don't
seems
even
like
know
vipers at the moment, and I don't need a morally good character to be. I guess part of it, I think,
and she like threatens that kid for being a kid, like
right. There's again,
she's like, I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah,
I'm gonna kill you. It's
hide
like
that thing, you dipshit. And so I'm okay with like watching a bunch of like bad people behave badly. I think the issue that you and I are having is they're not interesting stakes between these characters yet, and I don't know whose arcs. I don't have an arc to be invested in basically anyone at this point because none of that is really established by the end. The show is pretty obsessed with setting up a mystery, and I don't know that I need a mystery box show.
Right.
So we'll see.
There's a scene where the truthsayers are doing they're practicing their truth saying, right?
That's what I do on this podcast.
And they have all these people and I'm like, how does that work? Do you think they like ship those people in from like, hey, we got a thing for you. Like, hey, I want you to show up. And then at one point, so this woman's going to stand in front of you. We're going to shine a light in your face. And she's going to decide if you're a truthful person or not. Do they like ship those people in, or do they kind of like keep them on site like a farm? Do you know?
I don't know.
Like, what is it? How does that all work? That's what I want to know.
Maybe in episode 6, Origin of the Truthsayer. We'll find out, David.
Jihei, who's the actor who plays Kasha, talked to Screen Rant about like what Kasha's deal was. She said she definitely sees a darkness coming for the Sisterhood, and she worries it is going to be directly caused by the plan of putting Inez on the throne. Because Inez was in her nightmare, she probably believes this is what's going to happen. The original Mother Superior many years ago said, "This is the sign, this is the burning truth, and you will see it." Kasha's a truthsayer. She's the most gifted of all the truthsayers that exist in the Sisterhood. That's why she's at the right hand of the Emperor of the known universe. But back home, she's a prophet who's not heard. With her gifts, she's having these dreams and her ancestors are speaking to her, but her sisters will not hear her. I think she interpreted the dream as something that's definitely going to happen and that's detrimental to the Sisterhood. There's going to be some carnage, and she suspects it's going to be Inez. Anyway, we'll see what happens there. So that some preview on what's going to happen in the world of Dune Prophecy, and what happened with Kasha, who, probably not going to be with us anymore, based on what we see in this episode. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.